Into our pre-symposium panel. So our pre-symposium panel is a gathering of leaders who are going to be at our upcoming executive symposium, here to share their thoughts on change without burnout, balancing innovation, stability, and team capacity. And so on Thursday of this week, we will be having our executive symposium on that topic. And every week, as we lead up to the executive symposium, I bring three different leaders together that are going to be at the event to share their thoughts, their insights, their mistakes, their learnings from trying to implement change, and maybe the face plants they've achieved over time, maybe the successes they've had over time. But ultimately, it's a spark of conversation to discuss the topic we're going to be ultimately diving really deep into on Thursday: change without burnout, balancing innovation, stability, and team capacity. We've got three great leaders with us here today that are going to be at the event. We've got Armando, we've got JP, and we've got Nicolette. Armando, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Armando Frezza. I lead our procurement team at Exit Technologies. Um, I've been an individual contributor for sales and also a sales leader for quite a long time prior to this. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
JP, how about you?
JP Dumas, CX and Growth Strategy. I am the principal consultant. I've got a background in sales. I'm a recovering salesperson, customer retention, and employee engagement.
Very cool. And then Nicolette, how about you?
Hi, my name's Nicolette Jackson. My background's in talent acquisition and HR, mostly within startups, but always involved with sales, change, and people and talent strategy. So that's my background.
Very cool. And I'm Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder and CEO of Ambition in Motion. Our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they are there, their expectations meet reality, and when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders, because leaders create the experiences employees have while at work. And so we create technologies and communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. And one of the ways that we build community is through our executive symposium. So let's dive in. Topic for today: change without burnout, balancing innovation, stability, and team capacity. And so I want to start with innovation today in this pre-symposium panel, because I think that's something that's missed among a lot of executive teams. I think the concept of innovation is relatively clear. When something cool is created and then it becomes very marketable and innovative, and all those sorts of things are great. But I think the culture around how innovation is created seems to be only really set aside for the select few. How often do we see organizations where maybe we see like a specific sect of only just emerging leaders, or an innovation, or a tiger team, and a lot of other people are kind of like, maybe I have some ideas, but maybe they're not really heard, or maybe they're not really incorporated in the innovation process. And so I would like to start this conversation with, how can we build a culture of innovation where people, for their not only insight but also expertise within the work that they do, can be heard, can be leveraged, and ultimately the organization can make major strides in becoming better. And to be very clear, when I say innovation, yes, I mean big I innovation, like making entire new product lines, but I also mean little I innovation, like maybe we change the way we do this one process and it shaves off 5% of the efficient or of the inefficiency that was previously done. Like little I innovation and big I innovation, both in play here in this topic. So that's how I'd like to start. Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in because this is one of these topics where if you, the frontline employees, for most part, they know where the knives and forks are and they know where the bodies are buried. Unfortunately, they're not always involved in the decision-making process, or they're brought in later in the process. So I think if you're really going to drive that change, you're really going to drive that innovation, go to the people who are doing the work and get their ideas. And that doesn't mean we do another employee opinion survey in which we do nothing with the information. This is about, really, if you're going to have that tiger team, bring those folks in and have them be representatives. At the end of the day, if you want to get people involved, you have to demonstrate on some level that their opinion, their insights, the work that they do is valuable, and their perspective is just as important as anyone else.
I would also say decide on whether or not you're open to that feedback and what feedback that you're actually open to ahead of time. I've seen some leaders do that, right? And they open up and they get feedback from the front lines. They don't like what they hear. And then if you don't have that trade-off conversation with them afterwards, it said, okay, this is what we heard. This is a great idea, but this is what we'd have to give up. Or if you're not willing to be very transparent about why you can't do certain things, I think, you really have to be careful that you hear that, you give them a way, to show them that you've digested their ideas. Otherwise, I've seen that happen with the best of intentions, but it come back, with pitchforks because they were like, I told you how to fix this and you did something else, right? And that's where I just like to put a protective cone around that.
I'm smiling here because the phrase that comes to mind, and I've got a kind of I don't know, I've got a unique leadership style. I don't want to hire a bunch of lackeys and yes men and yes women. I am totally comfortable with people challenging the status quo in a healthy way. Healthy as in like not disrespectful, not totally chaotic and disruptive, because we hired people because they're good at what they do and they're smart. So if they see something that's broken and they can provide feedback, I want a culture where they're encouraged to do that and speak up, you know? Yeah.
It's an interesting point there, right? And we hired people, we want to get the feedback and whatnot. But I think the thread that runs through this is like with any relationship is based on trust.
Hmm.
And so I've got to create the type of environment, to Nicolette's point as well. It's if I'm going to share this, am I going to still have a job if you
Yeah.
say
Am I going to
something
get
you don't like?
crucified for saying
Yeah,
something, right,
yeah,
JP?
yeah.
Yeah.
And the reality is when we're trying to innovate, everything's not going to be a hit out of the gate. And if we have a culture where the person who came up with that idea gets blamed, you can rest assured, I ain't raising my hand again.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
These are really good points. I love, y'all bringing up really interesting concepts. So like JP, you bring up, the frontline employees, they know where the knives and forks are. They know where a lot of the issues are. You got to get them involved. But to Armando's point, you got to have healthy conflict. Like you have to have a culture where like there can be a back and forth because there's a very big difference. The words are the exact same, but there's a very big difference between saying like, "Hey, what are your thoughts on this new idea that we're going to pursue?" versus "What are your thoughts on this new idea we're going to pursue?" There's a very different way one can perceive the exact same words. One comes with a tone of curiosity, one comes with the tone of like, I don't know if I really should raise my hand. That sounds like a rhetorical question. And then Nicolette, you bring up this really good point of deciding what feedback you're open to. A funny, I don't know why I have like TV show references that come to my mind all the time, but have any of y'all seen the TV show Silicon Valley?
Yes.
Yeah. Armando, never seen it. Okay.
I don't watch
It's
TV, Garrett. All right. I
it's a
won't pretend.
mythical company based in Silicon Valley that's like a startup, and the antagonist is a guy who runs like a big conglomerate, think like a Google-esque type company.
Right.
And he wants to create his signature box, this like essentially a box that, you can store data and whatever in the cloud or whatever. And so he wants to put a signature on it. And so he has like a handwriting expert come in to evaluate his signature. And she comes back and says, upon reviewing this signature gives us the perception of extreme narcissism and being self-involved and not caring about their people. And the antagonist jumps in and is like, get this horrible woman out of my office. And so the point I'm getting at is to your point, Nicolette. It's like, what is the feedback you want to hear? Are you bringing in a handwriting expert to like give you the real feedback, or are you just trying to affirm the plan that you would already set in place? Which, to JP's point, you surround yourself with a bunch of yes people, which is in this case what this guy does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we used to have a term for it. We said we would have what we call professional food fights. And, and so that's us get it out in the open, get it on the table. It's going to be messy. And then when we're done, we're going to move forward. So everyone's had an opportunity to say their piece, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but it's really about the ability to articulate your business rationale, why we can or can't, why it makes sense or not, and then we move on. Because at the end of the day, we do have to keep the lights on,
Mhm.
and we have to be somewhat measured and not break the business.
You gotta
let's
make it feel human, right? You have to make it feel human and rational, and bring them along in that conversation. I always liken it to, some of my leaders, especially in startups or in the past, have always struggled with some of that, transparency. And really what it is like, you have to remember that feeling, I think, when my mom first showed me her checkbook. And I finally realized that, like, oh, bills have to be paid, money is not printed, like, oh, like she works for this and like she has to go through it. Oh man, I cost a lot of money. Like that psychological moment in life, I think, where lights come on and you realize it's not Santa Claus, right? Bringing people along in that journey in your own business and letting people understand that, like, you struggle too, you're vulnerable too, the business is vulnerable and has vulnerabilities, to Armando's point, letting people know that we are open to everyone's ideas on how to really, get through these things. And so again, I think it's, what level of transparency are you comfortable with, and starting there, building trust based off of that, and then, bringing people along and letting them feel that. I think my parents did a really good job. When I used to ask for expensive things, my dad would tell me I wanted a job. He'd be like, well, Nicolette, then you want a job. Again, he brought me along on a journey very early in life, so I didn't really panic when it was time to start paying bills. And I think that's kind of the people journey that you have to bring people onto as well.
But even with that, right? Like that's such a concrete example of let me show you what's involved with this. And that isn't always a conversation that leaders are comfortable
Right.
having. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times where quote unquote a company wasn't doing well. Maybe there were some tough decisions that needed to be made, and people were caught completely off guard. I'm talking about publicly held companies. I'm talking about earnings reports are out there. I'm talking about sales figures are there, and you'd be surprised how many people don't necessarily share that level of complexity or transparency. And I get it. There's different levels and whatnot that are happening in the business, but on some level, you got to kind of know what's going on in the business that you're a part of, right? And so, you have a leader who sits down and says, so let me tell you what this board meeting meant, or let me tell you what this earnings meant, or let me tell you why you don't see our commercials on during the Super Bowl because we can't afford it, whatever it is. So I think that also helps get people kind of focused on what it is that we do and how they can contribute.
Well, you're hitting on this power of transparency, which is what I'm writing down here from the company. Oftentimes I feel like it's masked or maybe masqueraded, or I don't know, it's there's like a veil of ambiguity that comes over it because companies will do and say things like, "Hey, I need you to try to find some new innovations with AI or drive some new efficiencies. Also, I know you're working like 65 hours a week. Don't drop any of your other balls. But if you can figure out how to drive some efficiencies and some innovations, like have at it, Haas. We'd love to see what you can come up with." And it's like, come on now. Like, are you asking me to get my job done and based on the things that we've been doing? Or are you asking me to innovate? Like, the organization needs to give their people the grace. And if maybe they're not in a position where they can innovate. Like that's sometimes like a thing where maybe it's corporate jargon. And I think JP, to your point, there needs to be a level of transparency about that. It's like we can't afford to like, go with these, new innovation times where you're not getting your basic core duties done. Maybe you can't, and that's like fine, but I think the transparency around that needs to be direct. It shouldn't be like, hey, try to find inefficiencies and make them efficient while still not missing any of your core tasks. So, like, what is your suggestion for an organization that, maybe is having this identity crisis between verbally saying they want to develop innovation and build a culture of innovation, but then at the same time telling their people don't drop any balls because
Well, yeah, yeah. I don't know if it's necessarily the transparency as much as it is the prioritization of what matters. And I'll give you an example because one of the conversations I remember clear as day was we were going through a very large merger, and there was a very senior leader. I'm talking about, those lower levels in the alphabet. And the person said, listen, there are a lot of ideas, a lot of innovation about what needs to happen now. But our number one focus is we cannot break the business. And so we need to be intentional about how we move the business forward and why. And so what that did is that cleared out a lot of the noise, a lot of the shiny objects, and said, here are our, 4 or 5 things that we're going to focus on. And I chuckle because on the one hand, man, we got clarity, transparency, and we got priorities. But I chuckle because I've seen organizations that may have 100 initiatives, and I'm thinking there are 250 work days this year, and you have 100 initiatives.
Yeah.
Tell me which one is most important.
Keep the main thing, the main thing, and the main thing, the only thing. And if the initiatives don't support the main thing and the only thing, maybe we don't even be messing with that stuff, you know? Yeah.
And when it comes back to the person, change the core task. I think if you want efficiencies out of someone, you stretch them in a way that they're going to have to figure out a way to be efficient, but point them in a direction in which you want that feedback and want those efficiencies. So if their tasks and what they're doing isn't in line with innovation or it's not pointed in that direction, well, change that direction, right? And I think the company I'm in right now is great. They really do want AI innovation, but it's all as a part of my role. So, come up with the processes and things as you're thinking of them, write them down, and then we have a forum to go through that. They don't point me and, go figure out tech innovation while I'm sitting in an HRC, for the tech team, right? Like it's just kind of build it into someone's role and goal. And to Armando's point, if they should be working on something that's pertinent to that, it'll come. But you have to balance that with execution, or else we don't have a business. So,
Absolutely. I mean, I would say that as leaders, most of us get to be in these roles because we're resourceful. I mean, it's very rare in business as in life that you're going to have all the resources you need. So you have to figure out how to be resourceful and make do with what you have. But that's also tempered with the fact that, to Armando's point, what is the main priority here? Because that's going to allow me to redirect those resources on those things that are important. And they're important because they're going to give us a measurable return that's important to the business. So, great idea. Love it all. Guess what? We're not doing any of it, but I can tell you why, and that's okay. Or I can say, guess what? This is going to happen in Q1 of next year because we don't have the budget for the next 4 months of the year, and we need to wrap up and finish strong. And
Yep.
people can get that. I mean, we're dealing with adults; they can get that. We just talk about what needs to be said, and then we move on.
what are we saying no to across the board? Should
What?
always
Or
be,
not yet. Or not yet.
yeah,
We're
right.
not saying no. We're saying not yet.
Not
Or
yet,
the
yeah.
ROI has not. Case has not been made clear to us. If I'm going to invest $1 million, I can't get 800,000 back. That math doesn't work, right? So yeah.
Well, let's play devil's advocate here because I hear a lot of interesting point. I don't want to stay on the theoretical. I want to stay in the practical here. And I hear a couple things that I feel like could be friction points. JP, we started off by saying, hey, the frontline employees know where the issues are. So we got to go to the frontline employees to get their feedback. But if at the same time, we are a senior executive potentially proposing a new change and we espouse that advice going to the frontline employees, we pull them away and they're thinking to themselves like, oh my gosh, like this 30-minute conversation means that I'm going to be this far back on my emails or this far back on these other things. And now I'm dreading this conversation, even though I'm meeting with like a skip level leader or something like that in my organization, someone who's very high up in the organization. I'm thinking to myself, oh crud, I might, have to stay late because I met with this person for 30 to 60 minutes to talk about my experience on what I think is inefficient. And so then I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, do I really get into the weeds on my feedback or I just kind of like quickly skirt this conversation so I can get back to work and get what I'm done because I don't own any equity in this company. I don't see the benefit of the P&L, even if this new innovation that comes out is really amazing for the organization. And so I don't know. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the employee and the executive team. And so when I hear like, oh, what do we need to say no to? What are the things that we need to say yes to? How do we delineate what is an important enough innovation initiative that it's like gets the front cover, and where does the alignment need to be throughout the organization, not just from the senior executive and the individual contributors, but the middle managers all in between there, because there's likely going to be conflicting things. Like, I don't know if you all ever been there before, where you have like a boss's boss who pulls
Yeah.
you aside and says, "Hey, I've got this really special project I want you working on." And then your boss is like, "Where the heck are you spending your time? I've never heard about this project. Why are you spending all this time on this special thing over here?" And then they get frustrated. And your performance review is done by your immediate boss, but the multiple layers up boss is like, "Dang, this was your opportunity to step up." So I guess where I'm trying to say is I'm trying to empathize with the individual contributor. How do we build a culture where everybody throughout the organization is in alignment on the importance?
Yeah, but you hit the nail on the head. You used the A word. It's alignment. It's literally saying that here are the things that matter, but as a leader, being aware enough to say, what can I take off your plate? What can I reallocate so that the main thing, I'm gonna go back to that, Armando, the main thing is still the main thing, right? That is what alignment is. It's saying, we're not saying drop what you're doing because these other things still matter, but now we have to reallocate resources in such a way where we can get both of these goals accomplished. But that alignment's going to happen at various levels to say, first of all, I'm going to ensure that my line leaders or my business owners in each of these areas have the resources they need, have clarity around the direction that we're going, and understand what the main mission is, so that as a senior leader, do not engage with or don't have a conversation where I'm engaging with a leader 2 or 3 levels down and saying, why are they working on X where we've already determined that Y is the priority for the business? And so that's where each leader has to make sure that they can translate that big flowery message at the top into very specific actions for the people below them. And if necessary, you might have to jump in and grab a shovel.
Well, and then on the other side of the coin, if I'm the individual contributor or the bottom level rep working on something, and I'm getting something from 2 or 3 or 4 levels above, and then I've also got my direct report, and it's apparent they're not talking to each other, I'm gonna put them both on an email chain and be like, "Hey, gentlemen, or ladies and gentlemen, or ladies, hey, I want to work with y'all, but I need y'all to be communicating so that we're all pulling in the same direction here, okay?" And I would say it more diplomatically than that, but that's where I'm going, you know?
Ideally,
Help
senior
me help
leaders,
you.
yeah,
Yeah,
ideally, senior leaders would work through someone's direct manager, right? I think
sure.
sometimes it gets jumbled when you have senior leaders going directly to people, and that's, part of the misalignment. But then, you do want some of that. Sometimes you don't want the layered approach. Some people want their organization to feel more flat, right? And in order to do that, you still just have to bring people along and let them understand the why and, those things. I think I've had this happen to me twice as an individual contributor, and the leadership that I had was the absolute difference. First time, the CEO asked me to do something, and my leader said, "Yeah, you're pretty much the project manager." And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how to drive. I was very lost in the sauce. Second time it happened to me, I had a leader that was like, "All right, I'm gonna, full transparency. This is what's happening." Gave me the full story. This is what your position is. This is what someone else's position is. This is what I expect you to drive, and the dates and what I expect. Again, just set me up for a win and how to work with these people. And he gave me context versus, feeling like, hey, the ball was tossed to you and go at it. At that point, the results will be varied, right?
And
What a
and the
great
yeah,
story.
and the
That's such a
reality,
great story, Nicolette. Sorry for interrupting, JP. I want to highlight why that's such a powerful story, because what you're highlighting is probably the core basis of this entire conversation, and that is the incongruency among a variety of leadership teams. And I don't think it's intentional. Like, I don't think when somebody or a leadership team is not prepared and not in alignment for an change initiative going on, um, it's not done with malice. I don't think there's malintent at all. I think they're all very well-intentioned people, but when there's a lack of alignment and a lack of preparation, maybe because you don't think you have time for it, or you don't think it matters, or like, hey, we've already gotten the budget approval and we gotten this, isn't that enough? Which
The
I see a
other
lot.
reason, Garrett, is sometimes you see a high performer and you say, "Oh, I can just throw this at them." You automatically assume like that these people, even though you might be throwing them a softball and they've been playing football, right? Like you automatically assume that's they can just figure it out, and that's not setting someone up for success. You should always assume that they have, the level of knowledge of a neophyte coming to anything, right? You should always give them as much context as they need and feel comfortable needing. It's just I've had that happen so many times where they're like, "Oh yeah, you can figure it out," but I'm like, I've never been in finance. That's not what it is. So
Yeah.
again, assuring resources are there and an alignment too, I think are very important.
Yeah, I think we're all in violent agreement. No good deed goes unpunished, which dulls the effectiveness of the organization because your top performers just keep more stuff, getting stuff added to them. But I also want to touch on this point, Garrett, is that we're dealing with human beings, so it'd be disingenuous to suggest that there aren't politics at play, and why we have, differences of opinion about how things need to be done. But I think on a more pragmatic level, we also have a misalignment of incentives. If I think about it from a sales perspective, my job is to close the deal and I'm bored and get new logos, whatever it is for a business. My job isn't necessarily the retention of that customer. Now, I'm going to say that as a sales heretic now, as a person who's run both sides of it. That your incentives across the organization also need to be aligned, not just your philosophies. Because as you mentioned earlier, if my review, or better yet, my bonus depends on it, that is the carrot that I'm going to chase. And so that's if we're going to be real about it, that's where the rubber is going to hit the road.
Yes,
Compensation
absolutely.
drives behavior, right?
I think it's going to drive part of the behavior for
Yeah.
sure.
And so
Whether
it's
it's
important for
the
it to be
yeah,
aligned. Otherwise, you have infighting within different parts of the organization, which is
yeah,
never good, you know?
exactly. And I think that's what one of the points Garrett's making is that it's not necessarily malice. It's not like we're dealing with bad people, but I literally get paid, incentivized, rewarded, promoted for whatever that looks like in my particular world. And so it becomes important as a leader that, again, we either filter or translate that into the operational behaviors that our teams need to be focused on, so that you know as we work collectively together, that moves the organization forward.
Even as a part of the reward culture, not necessarily always just cash or base salaries or
That's right.
bonuses,
That's
right?
right.
Like even as an HR partner, I know that I have to make my partnership with sales competitive and fun. And you're going to get some kind of accolade if you finish all of your surveys and those types of things. It's find out what their almost like their reward love languages in a career, and then really, harp on that as much as you can, especially during times of change. And so again, I think it's really good to know that about people and drive them with the carrot versus setting false expectations and then giving them the stick unexpectedly, right? It's just
Exactly. I literally had someone post about that today on LinkedIn, and their point was we don't necessarily spend enough time trying to figure out the what this job means to that individual. And it doesn't mean that we're going to do a bunch of one-on-one sessions and this and that, but inherently for some folks it might be the money, for some folks it might be the recognition, some folks it might be the promotion, some folks that might be the natural curiosity of fixing things, whatever it is. But I think those are also those hidden motivations of things that you do that allow a person to get alignment, that allows them to take on stretch assignment, that allows them to be somewhat invested, so they actually care about the outcome that the company's also trying to achieve, because it's tied into what they're trying to achieve.
Well, you're bringing up such a great point. And so if you're someone watching this video, I think one huge takeaway you can take from this is that if you uncover that there's a misaligned incentive within your organization, you as the top leader within that organizational unit of the organization as a whole, whether you're the business owner, the CEO, or even like a regional leader, like once you notice that there's a misaligned incentive, you immediately need to stamp that out. Like, it is fine that you're experimenting with different incentive plans. That is totally okay. And that's something that's totally normal if there's a mistake made on that. That's not inexcusable. What is inexcusable is letting it continue to proliferate over time. Because ultimately, by letting that happen, you are creating conflict, negative conflict within your organization, misaligned incentives. If I'm like an operations leader and I'm incentivized maybe financially at the end of the year by having a P&L that hits a certain percentage, but a sales team member sells deals that are unprofitable, but they don't see any issues with it
Right.
because they get compensated based on the end revenue, not based on how profitable that deal was.
Right.
Uh, this salesperson is going to be like, cool, I'm going to keep selling these unprofitable deals because I don't really care. And these operations people are like, what are you doing? This is killing this P&L right now. And the salesperson's like, I don't care. Commission's commission, top line revenue. And if you know this, if you're leading both these teams and you know that this is going on and you do nothing to stop it, you are the problem. Like that's it. You are complicit in the issue and you will create infighting throughout your whole organization moving forward. And so I know it kind of seems like a strong call out, but like that's a really powerful message that I think a lot of leaders maybe I don't necessarily skirt past or omit, but they're like, it's a hard conversation, and I'd love to see more revenue, and oh, maybe we could make it more profitable, or oh, like all these things where there's like an optimistic, rosy colored perspective on the thing, but at the end of the day, if you're aware of it and you do nothing to change it, you will proliferate the issue. I don't know. Good. Is that a line? I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think yes. I think there's two pieces to it, right? The first is when we look at businesses that thrive and we look at businesses that are challenged, even in the same macroeconomic environment, same industry, this and that, one could argue that the differences come down to, the easy answer, people say, oh, it's talent. I tend to think it's discretionary effort. And discretionary effort is really people actually trying on some level or have that level of alignment. So I think that's an important thing to call out. Um, with regards to whether or not leaders are complicit in what they do, again, I'm going to go back to the point of, at the end of the day, it's what is the alignment, how are people being rewarded, and whatnot. But let me just land this plane this way. When it comes to what we started off with, innovation and things of that nature, if you're going to change something in an organization, it can't be something that happens down the road. The first 30, 60, 90 days of this new initiative or innovation or process that we're trying to implement, people got to feel that and see it immediately, else you won't get that discretionary effort and it will go nowhere. And I'll close with this. I used to work at Baskin Robbins. That was one of my first jobs. And one of the ways you get people to buy some ice cream is you give them the little pink spoon. You give them the pink spoon because that's a taste of what's to come. And if you can't give your people a taste of what's to come, those initiatives are going to be DOA.
I like it. Armando, Nicolette, anything to add on to that?
I think it's incredibly important to really bring people along, be transparent when you can, figure out their reward cycle and what that looks like. And one of the tactical ways that I do that is I get really intentional about managing their PTO. We get really hype. We almost have like 3 week sprints in people's PTOs. Like if I know a change is coming and we start talking about coverages and those types of things, if I know my team really banks their work-life balance, and that's they really like that part of their role. I think getting ready for people's burnout, right? Because that's what happens at a certain point to JP's point. You want them to be invested, you want them to be looking forward to something and trying to get somewhere. Make sure that you're also trying to manage the part of them that gets tired after trying, right? And getting really good at intentionally giving them those time off, the breaks, the check-ins, the things that they need to mentally sustain through these pushes, I think is a great way to show up for anyone, not just, money's great, right? All of those things, but at the end of the day, even if you're making the most amount of money, if you don't feel rested, if you don't feel heard, if you don't feel seen, all of those things, burnout is inevitable. So I think it's just getting ahead of that and having a plan for what that looks like in this instance, how big the change is, and making sure you're prescribing a good plan for burnout and getting ahead of it. Just like JP said, if you know what's coming and you can give them a taste, also give them some ice cream, right? Like make sure that they're going to get that ice cream, that they're going to get that, that there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel and that you're able to paint that picture for them.
All right. I always like to ask these questions on these panels. I'd be curious to know, what is a popular belief about leadership that you disagree with? So I'm looking for a hot take here. Who's got a popular belief about leadership that you disagree with?
That you got to treat everyone the same.
Yeah.
Elaborate. What do you mean by that?
What I mean is, and this kind of ties into what Nicolette was saying, I'm not a total extremist here. What I mean is, all your people are different. They're all going to be motivated by different things. They're all going to need different things from a leadership, from a coaching, from a development perspective. They're all going to need different things, right? And everyone works a little bit differently, and it's up to you to understand everyone's strengths and weaknesses so that you can give them the things that they need and allow them to achieve at a high level, essentially. But they're not all the same, you know? I used to have a rep, Ben, and he would throw up like 40, 50% of my team's quota every single month. Now, the thing with Ben is I could have told him, I need more. I need you to do 70% of the team's quota, and he would have killed himself, but he would have gotten it done. But at the same time, what Ben needed from me is I would need to look at the gauges, the pressure and the temperature gauges on Ben. And when he starts running too hot, it's, hey, Ben, you're going to take off Thursday and Friday and take a 4-day week. Go ice fishing, go do something fun, because otherwise he'll self-destruct himself, right? And I never had to worry about Ben. I never had to look at his metrics or anything like that because he would kill himself. But what I had to do with that guy is I had to watch his gauges and make sure that or let him take decrease the pressure and take care of himself, self-care, right? That's what he needed. The other 9 reps on the team didn't need the same thing, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I speak in sports metaphors. So, ever since being 8 years old, I've seen it. I'm like, we all know who the talented players are on the team. Like, let's stop kidding ourselves. Right.
Yeah.
We know who they are and they're going to be managed differently. I would say that the myth that I think needs to stop is that the leaders have all the answers. You're not promoted into a role because you knew every single thing about that role. We put you there based on the potential and your ability to grow into what we needed. Now, the things that matter that are critical, we said, okay, you check those boxes, but we're going to stretch you and then you're going to mature and you're going to become a leader and then there'll be a next opportunity for the next role. I think the reason why that's important is that as a leader, you got to be humble enough to learn from your team. You got to be humble enough to know that you don't know all the answers. And I think that lends itself to getting people involved, getting people to participate giving that gives you an environment where people are willing to be coached and not be carried. Because if you come out and you act like you know everything, you don't, and you don't have the right answers, people are just going to wait to do whatever they're told. And how the hell are you going to innovate and move forward with that?
I
It
think
kind of goes back to wanting to be challenged, right, JP? I
right.
want people to speak up when they have good ideas.
Yeah, but you as the leader, remember, a lot of folks have come up in this command and control culture of I have all the answers. I'm very well put together. I lead. And leading is really, again, going back to one of our sports analogies, right? And leading is about getting everybody involved so that once you get these parts working together, then boom, we've got something special. So that's, to your point, it's understanding that some folks might need to be managed a little bit differently. Some folks might need to be given a little bit of a push. Others need to be left alone. It's all of these things that you don't need to have all the answers. That's why you have a team.
And you have to be vulnerable, right? You have to say, I don't know, I
Yeah.
don't know in the moments you don't know, right?
Yeah, I don't know. That's why you're here. Help me
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
I think that I've gotten the best reactions out of my people when I flat out just say, I don't know. Like they're like, okay, great. Like this is okay. And the fact that I don't know is okay too.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think mine is you really have to re-recruit your people. Coming from a talent acquisition leadership perspective, recruiting is not the first, 2 weeks of knowing an employee. It should be banked into their employment journey. And you should really think about when you're re-recruiting and when you're showing back up to re-remind them of all the things and all of the ways that you appreciate them. And so I think just having that mentality of, you do have to re-recruit people, even if they've, been with you for 5 years or they're most loyal people. Honestly, those are the people you have to re-recruit harder. So again, I think it's just that widely held belief that once people are here, they're here. I think people think about retention once it becomes a problem. I think when you strategize and you come up with ways to show up in the employee journey in ways that are meaningful and re-recruit them along the way, it's a really effective strategy, and people feel that.
Yeah, if you can't keep your people, I think you're gonna have a hard time keeping your customers. I
Right.
mean, I think that's just proof positive, just in my experiences. And the assumption is sometimes people need to leave. That's how they grow.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, Armando, JP, Nicolette, this was a great pre-symposium panel. If you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, I want to meet these three great leaders, come to the Executive Symposium. We're meeting on Thursday, 5 to 8 p.m. We're hosting the event at the Dell Diamond, so we're the home of the Round Rock Express. We're gonna have a good time. We're meeting from 5 to 8 p.m. I'll post the link on the RSV on how to RSVP in the comments on this video. But everybody, thanks for being here. Have a